I know we have some folks arriving to the presentation a little bit late. Feel free to put your info in the chat. Introduce yourself. I am going to just give a little disclaimer here before I get started. I don't have any. I don't think there's any need for necessarily like a content warning, but anytime you're talking about relationships, sex, consent. It can bring up all sorts of thoughts and feelings. And so I just want us to mostly take really good care of ourselves during this presentation. Also, I would like to view this more as a conversation, a facilitated conversation, but a conversation nonetheless. So if you have thoughts, questions, comments, why did you say that? What does that mean? Please don't hesitate to come off mute, ask your questions. I'm an open book. I think it's a lot more fun when we're engaged and communicating with one another. So, with that, I actually wanted to do an icebreaker because here we are. It is Valentine's Day. And then it's also the 14th is smack dab in the middle of February, which is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So I thought it'd be fun to do an icebreaker. Um, the question is, and if you don't want to participate, that's fine. There are only a handful of us. So, what is a myth or a misconception you had as you were growing up or as a younger person about love or relationships or sex or consent? We are not going to be talking about consent just specific to love or romantic or sexual relationships. But I would like to hear, does anybody have any myths or misconceptions that they grew up with that have been kind of dispelled now? I'll start so you have a good example. But when I was growing up, um, it was also culturally for my family. My family is from the Philippines, and you are required to give respect to your elders. So I never knew that I had a choice. Hi, Jacqueline. We're so glad to have you join us. We never were really given choices whether or not we could say no to hugs or kisses from our older relatives. It was an expectation that we had to. Um, I really was glad to learn about consent and bodily autonomy later, so that I could sort of break that generational expectation in my own family. Anybody else want to go and say what a myth or a misconception might be? Oh, let me check the chat. Hang on. Yeah. I think culturally it happens in a lot of places and spaces. Thank you for that, Ranim. Anyone else feel like sharing? It's okay if you don't. I'm a big fan of consent no matter what. So now, okay, we're gonna get into it. Um, I guess I'm gonna ask the group, what is consent? What do you think of when you hear the word consent? Any thoughts? You can put it in the chat, you can go off mute, whatever feels comfortable to you. Or maybe a synonym for consent. Any thoughts? Oh, let's see. Yeah, asking for permission. I think permission is kind of the very, yeah, exactly. Like yes, no, affirmation, denial. A lot of people might say like it's an agreement, but I want to move away from the idea that consent is a legal term. It is, but we're not going to use it in legal context today. We're going to use consent in a much broader, sort of open definition. It applies to literally every aspect of our lives. Again, it's not specific to sexual or romantic relationships only. Why am I not being able to advance? 1 second, y'all. Hang on. There we go. Oh, no, hang on. My Prezi's going all over the place. We're on a roller coaster together this afternoon. So, we're going to talk about understanding consent. It really is a fundamental component of healthy relationships of any kind. And I want to be specific that we're talking about consent based on both verbal and nonverbal communication. And I know, especially if you are working with ASD or IDD populations, being verbal might not always be an option, right? So we're going to talk about the nonverbal component as well. So we're talking about consent. It's how we communicate whether we're wanting to do something or not, regardless of what it is. Has anybody seen this before? Consent, like a way to describe what consent is. We love an acronym in the social services, social science field, don't we? And so there are a million, or not a million, there are a handful of acronyms to help us remember what is all involved with consent. So it refers to this agreement or permission. We already talked about that, right? Given by individuals. So it doesn't have to just be like a one-on-one. It could be a group conversation. It could be many people putting their thoughts, feelings, opinions, and boundaries into the conversation. So we know that consent needs to be freely given, right? That there is no pressure or coercion or expectation to give an answer. Um, it's reversible. Do we change our minds all the time about lots of things? Anyone like me and you have a stack of books? I mean, I read books, but sometimes I only get like first through the first three chapters and then I put it down and it sits on my side table by my bed. Anyone else? We change our mind about things all the time. I think it's important to remember that even when we're really excited again about something, that doesn't mean we don't get to change our minds or recognize maybe we aren't ready to do whatever we were about to do. Again, it isn't necessarily specific to sex or relationships, but it does include them, of course. So consent is also informed. I want to add that to specific as well. It is that we know what we are consenting to. Okay. It isn't blanket consent. It isn't, oh, I'll just do whatever no matter what is about to happen. Most people are not comfortable with that. I'm going to take an educated guess and say most people are not going to give blanket consent for pretty much anything because we want choice and autonomy. Again, no matter what the situation is. So when we talk about informed and specific consent, I'm just going to give this really good example. Okay, so when I did consent-based education, a lot of times I was talking to adults and professionals, right? And one time I was giving a similar training to some professors up on KU campus. And one of the professors was maybe a slightly older gentleman. And he said, I have always taught my boys, I'm assuming he was referring to his sons, that they should always get consent before they go out on a date with someone. And I thought, this is an opportunity for us to have a little quick conversation. What could be problematic about that? Any thoughts about giving consent before you go out with somebody? And his addition to saying that was to make sure nobody got in trouble. Hmm. I don't know what that part meant exactly, but I want to know what you all think. Can we give our consent before we even know what we're doing? No, absolutely not. And if anything, the idea that we have to get consent to keep ourselves out of trouble, I think that is highly problematic as well, right? That is sort of intimating that something is going to go wrong or somebody's boundaries are going to get crossed. And I would say that a person signing away consent prior to any activity, they might change their mind. They might not know what they're getting into. Again, it's informed, it's specific, it's reversible, and it's freely given. Now, enthusiastic, it's just that we're excited about what's happening. Any questions about defining consent, understanding consent before we move forward? And so, again, I just want to say you can also teach consent to anyone of any age. Some people are like, well, I have a toddler and my toddler does not respect my boundaries. That is true. But we can also teach a toddler, hey, I don't feel like being touched right now. Or teach our toddler, hey, if you don't feel like a hug, you don't have to give one. There's more and more literature, children friendly books out there about this topic. And if anyone is interested, I could probably also share like a reading list post the presentation about books around bodily autonomy and consent for all ages. All right, here we go. So, moving forward, I want to talk about the importance of verbal consent. So, obviously, in most situations, we want people to say what they mean, and it's backed up by that nonverbal component. Their body language matches the verbal affirmation or denial, whatever they might say. It also is about clarity, right? Because I just want to throw this out to the group. Could someone say yes and not mean it? Could that happen? Absolutely. Of course, we know there are many, many reasons somebody could say yes and not mean it. Again, they could feel pressured. They could feel coerced. They could feel, ooh, like they don't have a choice. Or maybe the power dynamics are too inequitable, right? Sometimes, like in a work situation, when your boss says, do you want to take on that extra task? We might not feel like we can always say no, right? This is a really good example of consent outside of the realm of sex and relationships. Yeah, peer pressure, Lori, absolutely. I think peer pressure, again, it doesn't have to be specific to sex and relationships. Kids, teens, adults, we also experience peer pressure. Um, I'm just going to give a really goofy example, but I felt peer pressured to get into, um, oh my gosh, what is that show? Love is Blind. Um, I will not take on peer pressure like that again. That show was terrible. But my point is that we even experience it as older adults, right? We experience peer pressure all the time in various situations. So when we talk thanks, Trendy. When we talk about the importance of verbal consent, it's really about creating that respectful environment and that we want people to express their comfort levels openly. So I'm going to just say I'm borrowing this from a student that I worked with or that I was presenting to, a very savvy freshman in high school said, well, it feels like if you can't say no comfortably, then can you really say yes? And that's, I mean, I say it in almost any presentation when I talk about consent. I think that is a really smart way to frame it. If you don't say no, if you can't say no comfortably, then how can we say yes comfortably? I think it's a smart way to think about things. So let's see, what else have we got here? Um, let's go to nonverbal consent. So when we talk about nonverbal, that's body language. It's indicated through body language, gestures, eye contact, and it's really important to be aware of these cues. Now I know I referenced it before, but there might be folks who are not good at verbally communicating. Similarly, there might be folks that are not as good at reading body language, right? And so we have to have multiple components to understand if we're really getting consent. So when we talk about nonverbal, if somebody's saying yes, but their body language is totally shut down, or they're not making eye contact, or they look physically uncomfortable, we may not have actual consent, right? Um, I always use this example because it's personal for me. I am one of those people when I am uncomfortable, I laugh nervously. So from the outside, for like the fly on the wall, I might look like I'm having a grand time, but in fact, I'm laughing nervously because I am not comfortable. That can be a lot of people's reactions when they aren't. So thank you, Jacqueline. I agree. I feel like it's not uncommon, right, for people because we don't always know what to do with that energy. I'm uncomfortable. What am I going to do? We aren't taught explicitly how to say, like, hey, that's not okay. I don't want you to do that. We need to get better about expressing our boundaries, but that is not our fault when we are uncomfortable and don't know what to do. Okay. So we're talking about verbal, nonverbal, um, let's talk about what happens when there is no verbal and we only have nonverbal to work from. When I think about the ASD and IDD communities or populations, I think about who knows that person best, right? Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a caregiver. But also, if somebody is using assistive tech, I think that would be a great way to clarify. Oh, I'm asking you a question and you're nodding yes, but I also want to have that verbal confirmation. If somebody is nonverbal and using assistive tech, this is a really great time to have that additional component of communication, right? People, even when they can't speak or use their voice, they have communication that they want to give to another person. So we need to make sure we're checking in. Um, if somebody can write and not talk, that might be another way to get that verbalized confirmation. Any other thoughts about verbal versus nonverbal consent? Okay, let me make sure I'm doubly checking the chat. All right. So now moving forward, let's talk about setting boundaries. So when I talk about consent, I think another way or like a synonymous way to talk about it is personal boundaries in everyday life. Does everybody have different boundaries? Yeah, right? We are all individuals. We might pair up in like a romantic partnership with people that have similar boundaries. In our friend group, we might be drawn to people with similar boundaries. Absolutely, yeah. And so when we talk about having different boundaries, how are we going to know what other people's boundaries are without asking or having conversations? I think especially when we get to sex in a relationship, or maybe it is casual sex, it is still important to have that discussion of boundaries. And I want to just preface when it comes to casual sex, I know that this is not like a commonly held belief for a lot of folks, but or a commonly understood belief, sorry. Um, consent boundaries are just as important in a casual hookup as they would be in a long-term relationship. It doesn't matter the seriousness or the length of a relationship or an interaction. Absolutely, we need to know what are people comfortable with. We don't want to cross somebody's boundaries. And so having that mutual respect and understanding is incredibly important. Um, I think also setting boundaries, it really empowers people to say what their needs are and that they can maintain that comfortable interaction throughout. So now, okay. We're going to move on to identifying red, yellow, and green behaviors, or red flag, yellow flag, green flag behaviors. And I see this like model of talking about healthy versus unhealthy relationships a lot. Um, I also want to reframe us again that we're not just talking about love or sexual relationships. I think those kinds of behaviors can be indicated in friendships as well, or even in work environments where our boundaries aren't respected. And so, again, this way of looking at things, I think applies to lots of different kinds of relationships. So let's get into it. Green flag behaviors. Obviously, I have some examples here listed, but they are an indicator of a healthy relationship, again, characterized by mutual respect, trust, clear communication. I think some good examples are here in the example or in the slide, but I just also want to give some like random sort of maybe unexpected examples. So like in a friendship, a friend that listens to what you said and maybe 3 months later brings it back up and says, "Hey, I remember when you said you actually didn't ever want to go on a roller coaster. I remembered that you said that, and so we're going to do a different activity. That's a good friend. A friend that remembers your specific boundary and upholds it and takes it into account for a group activity. I think that's a really great green flag behavior. In a love relationship or a sexual relationship, somebody who remembers like a physical boundary. I'm going to use a personal example again. I had a really good friend for a long time who, because we were so close, I just assumed that they appreciated what a hugger I was. Come to find out, literally decades into our relationship, uh-oh, my friend really actually doesn't like hugs. It was after I had gotten into this work, I realized I wasn't checking in with some of my closest friends about what their boundaries were. And I was remiss. It didn't damage our relationship per se, but I know that he appreciated that I acknowledged it literally 20 plus years later. I'm so sorry I didn't realize you were a hugger. I wish I had known. I wish I could take back those hugs. But, there are lots of ways we can show love and express affection for people. Anybody else have any good examples of green flag behavior, maybe in their own experience? I think somebody might be typing. Let's check. Okay. So now, oh, did I have anybody in the chat? No? Okay. Yellow flag behaviors. This is when we're maybe not sure or something is concerning, but it hasn't fully moved into red flag territory. So I think some really good examples here are inconsistency. We are allowed to be inconsistent as human beings, but when somebody tells you one thing and does another, I know that this is a very buzzy term, but y'all know the term gaslighting. This is actually from a really old movie from the 40s. But the movie was about a woman who was married by, I think he was a younger man, for her money, and he wanted her to think she was losing her mind, like that she was mentally unwell. And so this is where the term comes from. He was changing the setting on their gas lamps. And so she was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought I turned that off." And then he'd be like, "Oh no, you must not have." And that is where the term gaslighting comes from. I don't know if y'all know that, but I love film and history. So I thought I'd throw that tidbit in. When we talk about gaslighting, that's when somebody is telling you one thing and then doing another, or telling you that what you think is happening isn't real. Passive aggressiveness is a really good indicator of yellow flag, and then potentially red flag behavior. And then manipulation or coercion. Somebody who only wants what they want. Or will not take no for an answer. That is again yellow flag behavior. And then that leads me to the next kind, which is red flag. And red flag is, clear signs of unhealthy behavior. We've got like jealousy, control, threats, actual violence, right? Um, Recognizing these behaviors early can be essential to ensure safety and well-being in relationships. But here's what I want to say about that. Nobody goes into a relationship thinking, I'm in an abusive relationship, right? People get into relationships because they feel comfortable, because they've been made to believe that they are cared for and loved. Again, doesn't have to be specific to a romantic relationship. It can happen in friendships too. But a lot of times we see victim blaming mentalities around people experiencing sexual or domestic violence. And they say, well, didn't they know? Or why didn't they get out sooner? Or, a litany of other things that people say that are very victim blaming. We live in a society that victim blames survivors of sexual and domestic violence, unfortunately. And so I just want us to recognize people do not get into those situations thinking, I'm about to be harmed. Even when harm happens, they might be doing everything possible to convince themselves this is a one off. This is not who that person is. They love me. I can fix that person. Right? Again, we might even do that in friendships that are unhealthy. Any thoughts about red, yellow, green flag behavior? I want to be mindful of our time and that we also have like a scenario at the end too. I want to throw out an example of red flag behavior in friendships that we might not always recognize is being unable to see. This is again, I think, an example we might not always think of. So I want us to kind of turn it inward when we can't see anything wrong with the other person. I'm not saying that we have to look for things that are wrong with another person. What I'm saying is we gloss over things that might make us uncomfortable, right? I don't know if that's more like yellow flag behavior, but to me, it's a behavior that says I am unwilling to look clearly at what the other person's motivations might be. And we do that for lots of different reasons. Again, we have to think about what our own boundaries are. Does what that person is doing align with what makes me comfortable or align with my values? So when we talk about yellow, red, green flag behavior, I also want to think about what we find permissible in relationships. Okay, moving forward. So when we're talking to people, again, as professionals, we might be talking to a family we're working with, or maybe somebody's a therapist and they're working one-on-one with the kiddo or a teen. I think real life examples, regardless of whether somebody is in the ASD or IDD population, having real life examples helps make things more concrete, right? I know I've given some personal anecdotes as examples, but it's because they resonate to or with whatever it is that I might be talking about. A real life example can also help someone identify what that behavior is looking like in their life in practice, right? So say you are talking to a kiddo and they're saying, every time I see this person, um, they demand that I come and give them a big kiss on their cheek and that I come and like snuggle up and I'm supposed to feel just like comfortable with them, but I don't. This might be for a younger kid, right? We can say, hey, this is a really good example of sometimes people don't understand what it means to have bodily autonomy. And if you've never heard that term before, let me explain it to you. It means that regardless of our age or our status or our relationship to that person, our boundaries deserve to be respected and should be respected. And I think that this is going to be really complicated because a lot of times boundary violations, whether they be smaller things like the hug or the kiss, or bigger things like sexual or domestic violence, are usually happening from somebody that that person knows, right? So, most people under 18 who experience sexual or domestic violence, does anybody want to give a guess? What percentage know the person that's doing the harm? Any thoughts or guesses? I'll look in the chat too. What percentage know the person that is enacting harm on them? Oh, we got a guess. That's a good one, Jacqueline. You are so close. It is 80% for adults, 90% for kids and teens under 18. You guys are so smart. You guys are awesome. Thank you for that. I think that we have to, when it comes to things like sexual and domestic violence, we have got, you guys are awesome. Excuse me. I'm getting over something. I'm not usually a baritone, usually I'm an alto. Um, when we talk about the rates of people knowing the person that harms them, we have got to dispel the myth of stranger danger, y'all. I think it has gained a lot of attention in the last like 5, 10 years in talking about human trafficking. This is just a quick reminder. The majority of people who are trafficked by somebody that they know or already have a relationship with. It is not strangers in bushes, in alleys, in white vans. Oh my gosh, I just saw that there's a new horror movie called the Man in the White Van. So, like, literally, we have a societal norm around talking about strangers are the people who do the harm. And I just want to say the reason why we would rather think of a stranger doing that is because I think it's a lot harder than reckoning with somebody I care about, somebody I know or I love, or somebody that's in my family is hurting or harming another person that I know, care, and love about and love. Right. So we would love to like put that onto strangers and make these sort of mythical monsters. But in fact, 90% of people under 18 know the person that harms them. I mean, domestic violence is called domestic violence because it usually happens within the home. All right. So now, any thoughts, questions, comments before we move on? I'm looking at the time. I'm doing pretty good. We've got about 8 minutes until we get into the scenarios. I know it's a small group, but I really appreciate y'all's participation. You guys are awesome. So now, okay, let's get into trauma informed responses. And so I know for a lot of professionals in the field, you get if you have licensure, you probably are a mandated reporter. I mean, it's like very likely you're a mandated reporter. You probably already know about trauma informed care, but I really want to kind of cover some specificity around how to respond to disclosures and how to be trauma informed when somebody is having a hard time. Okay. So understanding trauma informed care is essential for oh my gosh, my for effective communication and support for youth disclosing harmful experiences. So, what is trauma informed care? I think it's always important to define something before you talk about it in case not everybody knows. It really is just about recognizing the impact of trauma and creating an environment that not only recognizes that trauma may have happened, but what do we do to make people feel safe so that they can talk about their experiences, receive support. And, I've always loved this other term for trauma informed care, which is healing centered. I just think that that's a beautiful way to reframe and look at trauma informed care. If we think about what it takes for people to heal at their own on their own terms, at their own pace, we can talk about it from that perspective of what it could look like. When we talk about trauma informed care, I think it's important to recognize that um, for youth, um, I did this activity years ago and it stuck with me where it's like a brain building exercise basically. And so it talks about if youth experience one traumatic event, it really can affect how their brain develops, how they react to future trauma. We all know that. We all know about ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences, etc. This brain building exercise was so cool, you guys. Essentially, we talked about how for every traumatic event that might hinder the brain's development, positive reinforcement, even that one person, like a teacher or a clinician or a family member that is supportive and positive and giving that child or teen what they need to move forward, that can actually mitigate some of the damage that trauma does to brains. This brain building activity was super fun. We essentially used straws and I know we're not supposed to call them pipe cleaners. Chenille sticks is what we're supposed to call them. And heavy weights. So the weight was the trauma, and then the straws were the positive supports. And essentially, we're kind of building this almost like rickety structure that is the brain, right? Because the brain is both profoundly fragile and amazingly strong. After working with traumatically brain injured populations for almost a decade, I can tell you the brain is a remarkably regenerative organ. And if you ever want to know exactly how powerfully regenerative and strong it is, look up people who have had hemispherectomies for seizure disorders, where they have half of their brains removed to remove the ability for the seizure activity to happen between the two hemispheres. It is wild, but incredible. And I don't know. I'm just fascinated by our brains. They are both powerful and, like I said, incredibly fragile at the same time. All right, here I am getting lost in my own words. Let's keep moving forward. When we respond to disclosures, it is important to be present in that moment. We need to acknowledge what they're saying and validate them, but we never need to ask for more detail. We can believe that something happened to somebody and not ever know any details at all. Um, at the place I used to work at, that was like a rape crisis center, anti-sexual violence agency, I was really always so heartened to let people know the only time you might have to provide details about your experiences is in like a clinical intake for therapy. Otherwise, we can just be with somebody in how they're feeling and never have to know every aspect of their story. I think also providing options for further conversation, such as we can talk about this with a counselor. You can talk about this with your therapist. Letting a child or teen know there are more options out there with other safe adults. Creating a safe space, I think environment is a lot. We wouldn't want to just ask somebody what's going on with them when they're surrounded by their peers. Similarly, even like law enforcement agencies um, recognize that, like, if you're going to interview a potential victim, you're going to want to have a something that doesn't feel intimidating. A lot of police departments use children advocacy centers. There's one in Lawrence called the CAC, the Advocacy Center, and they have one of the most delightfully colorful and engaging, soft, warm interview rooms. I mean, any kid, any age could walk in there and have no idea that this is a space where adults are collecting information, right? And not to say that that's like colluding to hide it from the kid. It's about creating an environment where they feel safe enough to talk. Um, I think active listening is hard if you don't know how to practice it. Specific to disclosures, I just want to say kids and teens will have very strong reactions if you have very strong reactions. So, like, if you are a caregiver or a parent and a child discloses to you, your first reaction might be to be really emotional, right? Or even as a clinician or a professional in the field, we might have a strong attachment and like really care about this child. It is so important for us to stay present, to be emotionally regulated, because how we react can really affect the way the next steps for that child goes. We shouldn't make promises and say we're going to get that bad guy. The bad guy might be somebody that they really love a lot. In fact, it usually is someone that they care about. So for us to talk about it in a way that is, I'm gonna harm that person. That person's gonna go to jail forever. We cannot make promises like that because also we do not know what the outcomes will be. It is more important to maintain the safety of that one-on-one relationship so that that child knows, even if other parts of this process don't work out, I know I have one person who listens and cares. Okay. We're almost done, you guys. This has been really fun. I know we're a little bit over time, but I'm going to wrap it up. So, these are just some ways we can foster those healthy relationships. Again, creating an environment where you feel safe. One thing I used to do as the mom of a teen, my child is very grown now. He's almost 30. Um, I was the carpool mom. So I was always listening to the conversations that were being had in the back seat. And even though I didn't ask a lot of questions, I was always the person that you could come to. And if you needed to be picked up from the slumber party at 3 a.m., no questions asked, I was your girl. Right? We need to be safe and trusted adults for clinicians or professionals. It's not about having no boundaries. It's actually about having really strong boundaries and saying, this is when I'm available. I will be available to you readily during this time frame, and then actually following through on that. Right? So let's see what else. Empowering them, telling them that their boundaries are important, respecting their boundaries, modeling that behavior. It's important to say, hey, if you feel like you're in an unhealthy relationship with your bestie, that's not okay. What can I do to be supportive of you if you need to make some changes? If it's a love relationship, letting them know, I see this sometimes where teens are like, well, my parents really like my partner. We shouldn't be prioritizing whether we like somebody's partner more than we care about the safety of that child or teen, right? Last little bit, resources and support networks. Having information is powerful. Knowing where to get sexual health education, birth control, where to go if something has happened, to get like a SANE exam, a sexual assault nurse's examination. Those are done at local hospitals for free. Usually there's an advocate present from a place like a rape crisis center. For domestic violence, there are usually hotlines. A lot of times that can be fraught for people under 18 because of mandated reporting, but I'm going to touch on that real quick. When we talk about mandated reporting, it is not the only thing that we can offer. Yes, we might need to make a mandated report. We might need to make a report because of our licensure, because we want to keep that child safe. But there are many other ways to engage with the community. It could be a support group. It could be therapy. It could be an art therapy workshop. Collaborating with schools, local orgs, and parents to create that supportive environment is truly a powerful modality to use to support kids who've experienced things. So now, oh my gosh, we got through all of the presentation, but I did want to bring a couple scenarios. And since it's a small group, I think we might be able to get through both. But I knew I was going to be talking to some professionals. I also knew I was going to be talking to people who have probably like kids or teens in their lives already. So, oh, sorry, Prezi likes to give us motion sickness sometimes. Um, this is just one idea that I thought for professionals. If a teen ever came to you and said, hey, I'm feeling pressured to have sex with my partner, and we've only been together for a few months, but then let's look at it from a gendered perspective. He tells you he doesn't feel ready to have sex, but that men and teen boys, they're really, you might not say it this way, but there might be that indicator like, aren't aren't men always up for sex? It's a myth. It's not true. What are some things we might say to them if they're worried about that partner breaking up with them or saying no in general? Any thoughts? Does it matter what gender we are? Do we all get to have a say in our consent?
We definitely do get to have a say in our consent.
That's
A
right.
100%.
100%.
I think, I mean, honestly, like, I think my first instinct is just like, well, of course you can say no. I feel like there's like the movie telling of like the talk that you give, like you can say no if you're not ready, that's okay,
Mhm.
and yeah, your partner might break up with you. I'm here to help you through that situation if that happens, because I know that's going to be really upsetting. But you would hope that, if their partner actually does care about them, that, they would be
They
okay with
respect their
him saying no.
boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. And do
Yeah.
you really want to stay with a person that, but I also do know that with teenagers, it feels different.
They have a tendency to catastrophize. It's end of the world stuff, right? If your partner breaks up with you. Katie, thank you for that comment. I think that's so right on. And I would also say that, one of my favorite things to say to a group of men or boys is that men and boys get to feel awkward and unsure and not confident. Um, just because somebody identifies a certain way doesn't mean that they have to know everything. And I think actually the pressure that men and boys feel to have sexual prowess or sexual confidence is a hell of a thing. It's a hell of a lot of pressure. And in fact, regardless of gender, everybody should have their boundaries respected and to feel comfortable. I'm checking time. Okay.
And
Any
we
other
have,
thoughts about this scenario?
I'll read from the chat too, from
Oh,
Lori. If you
sorry, I missed
feel
that.
it, oh, no, you're good. I'm here to check the chat. I got you.
Thank you, Katie.
If you feel it in your gut that is uncomfortable, it's okay to say no or to not know.
Love that. I love that to not know. That's
Yeah.
so powerful. We don't always have to know in the moment. And so when we don't know, I should have said this earlier. If something is a maybe, that's a no in the moment, right? We don't have to know everything. And a no in the moment isn't an end of the relationship. And so I think it's really important to say that. Um, Yeah, I think it is I love that you said in your gut too. We as a society have a tendency to squash down intuition. And I know it's not scientifically we can't take data on intuition. Okay. But I would say our gut check is incredibly powerful. And I think with kids, we have a tendency to say like, well, just do it anyway, even if it feels scary. Kids get to use their intuition too. In fact, that is powerful in them building what are my boundaries. Lori, did I see you jump off mute for a second?
Yeah, I think especially that's why I put that at the very end and about the gut sort of thing, because if I was talking to my kids that way that are preteen and teenagers, that's the way I would present it, because a lot of kids, especially around that age, or really pretty much any age, they have that gut feeling.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, it's we need to start affirming that it's okay to have that gut
Yes.
feeling and to listen to maybe your heart or your gut, or maybe even your
Yes.
brain's telling you no.
Yeah.
So we really do need to do that.
I think it's something that we forget how strong of how powerfully strong it is, our intuition. And again, it helps us understand, even if like everybody else in my group is comfortable doing this and I'm not, that is okay. Because that's where that sort of, peer pressure comes into play, right? Oh, sorry, I missed the chat here. What do we got? Yes, stress to everyone that it is okay to say no. I love that. Oh, this is such a great group. Okay, last little bit, you guys, and I think we're wrapping up quite nicely here. This one's a little bit more for professionals in the field. Um, you are working with an adolescent with an intellectual disability who has very little knowledge about her body and sex. The parents are concerned that their teen is touching her own private body parts and want it to stop. Oh, I have a typo. Sorry. What do you say to the teen? What do you say to the parents? Now, I just want to say, just prefacing this, I think most people with disabilities are usually infantilized when it comes to sex and their bodies and their relationships. Okay. Or if having a relationship is even thought of as a possibility for that person. We do not get comprehensive sex ed in like regular quote unquote education. And so for SPED, I'm not sure that they get those same talks. I sure hope that they do. But the reality is what is happening in this scenario is self-discovery and masturbation. Real talk. So, what are some things we could say to the teen? Or maybe we don't talk to the teen. What do we say to the parents? Because often parents are gatekeeping, furthering education about bodies and sex for kids with disabilities. Thoughts? Love to hear from you.
I think I would say that I would tell the teen, like, that's totally okay to, touch your own private body parts, but also, talk about like where to do that versus like a public space and a private space, and what's the difference between those two things, and if they know that or not. And I think I would start there with the teen.
Charlotte?
Right.
Yeah, Charlotte.
Lori, what were you going to say? Thank you for that comment, Charlotte. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, I like both the comments are right on, because I used to work with special needs kids, especially nonverbal autism, and they were in middle school, so you would see a lot of that, and we kind of had to just, and the parents, like you were saying, the parents feel embarrassed or some, yeah, so you just really have to educate both of them, and right now. Yeah, and right now there are some great, easy to read books for that age, that are, they're not, I can't say maybe they aren't picture books, but they're short, they're sweet to the point where they can understand, they're on the kids level, and a lot of times they're good for the parents too, you know.
Agree, Lori. I think of that every time I give a consent conversation is the adults in the room need this too, right? I'm going to guarantee, like I said, I'm, almost 50 years old. I got terrible sex ed. I never learned about consent in schools. For people older than me, I'm sure it was way worse. But even today in 2025, we have abstinence only sex ed going on in many, many places. Real talk, moving forward in the next few years, I don't even know what sex ed is going to look like. So, to have those conversations with families, with the kiddos that we're working with, normalizing for kids with disabilities, learning about your body is no different for any other kid. Hormones are going to happen no matter what your diagnosis is, right? You are a living human creature. And so that part of our development doesn't skip over people that are, with ASD and IDD. It just doesn't, that's just not how it works. And so I think it's important. I really like, Jacqueline, your comment. Um, you know, it's natural, and that telling both sides, for the kiddo and for the parents, this is, I hate the word normal, but this is normal. And where we do it, how we do it, who has access to us, those are important conversations too. Oh my gosh. Well, we are just ending right on the nose at 3. I love it when that happens because I could talk for hours. Um, you all have been great. I think if you need any contact information for further questions, that the Kansas Family Support Center can offer that to you. I am honored to talk with you all today, and I hope that this moves us forward thinking about what we want for ourselves too. Thanks so much, Jacqueline. Thanks everyone for participating. I hope you have a great rest of your Valentine's Day.